you come to the walks of life.
I would like all the readers to be very, very happy.
That's what's really exciting for me, at least, is keeping these dishes alive, keeping them going.
You guys started this 10 years ago, and I feel that in the internet time, that is an absolute lifetime. Tell us all about how this started.
Yeah, so we started the blog in 2013. Basically, it was born out of the fact that my parents in 2011, they moved to China for a temporary work assignment. And my sister and I realized when they were basically on the other side of the world, that we no longer had access to a lot of the foods that we grew up enjoying eating and that our parents prepared for us growing up. And while we love to cook, we really had no idea how to make a lot of the Chinese dishes that we grew up eating. So we started the Walks of Life as a kind of way to record those recipes and also stay connected while, we were here in the US and they were in China, just to kind of keep up with each other day to day.
Bill, you say that moving to China back then was a huge culture shock for you. And actually that also planted a seed in terms of you guys realizing how little you knew about Chinese food. So can you tell us more about that journey of discovery?
Oh, that's so true. I mean, it was an amazing assignment that we could move, work assignment that is, that we could move over there. And and we quickly discovered that Sarah and Caitlin weren't paying attention in the kitchen when we were cooking. So, but the foods that we had over there in Beijing, where we were stationed, it was an amazing experience. Very authentic foods, and a lot of those foods have made it over to the U.S. Today. But back then, it was a big shock in a good way. It was everything was delicious. Everything was so much fresher. It was an amazing experience.
It's also from a different culture. And I came to the US when I was 16. And so my food background at that time was mainly Shanghainese food. And then when I came to the US, it was literally all Cantonese food. Okay. But when we went back to China, when we lived in Beijing, and then it's like, whoa, it's just like explosion of varieties and different cuisines and stuff like that. So it was, how would I say, overwhelming in a very good way.
In a good way, like food from Yunnan, food from
it was
Zhejiang,
tremendous.
all over the place that we just never knew about.
Yeah.
Sarah, I mean, when you first started cooking, you realized you had zero idea of how to actually put together a recipe. I mean, she mentions, Judy, how you would just say, just add some soy sauce, add some rice wine. I mean, how do you go from that to creating a whole regimented recipe series and blog and now a cookbook?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's evolved over time. I think early in the life of the blog, it was really like a sort of my sister and I translating our parents' recipes into something that was easy to follow. So we grew up cooking from recipes, right? We grew up cooking mostly Western food from recipes that we found online or in cookbooks. But of course, we didn't have like Chinese dishes that were distilled in that format. So we were trying to, in the early days of the blog, take our parents' sort of cook by feel approach and record what they were doing with teaspoons and like actual measurements and like cooking times. Like we would have to be like really regimented about like how long are you cooking that, like over what heat. And so Caitlin and I kind of came to it with like a knowledge of how a recipe is supposed to work, but then like taking our parents' like very sort of organic approach to cooking and then kind of like forcing it into that format so that other people could reproduce it. And then over time, I think, as we started cooking these dishes ourselves and learning more about Chinese cooking in general, we started to become, our own recipe developers in our own right and, joining our parents on this sort of quest to record dishes that, you know, maybe weren't necessarily part of our family repertoire. Like once we ran out of those like family recipes that we were making all the time, it was like, okay, now we have to sort of explore recipes that we've eaten in restaurants or that we, you know, that other family members have cooked for us. And so, you know, through that evolution, we've been able to kind of all just improve our recipe development skills and making those recipes super clear for the home cook.
As you say, a lot of people are coming into this perhaps for the very first time. And Bill, I mean, with your experience in this kind of Chinese American takeaway background, how have you seen not just Americans, but perhaps globally, how people's perceptions of Chinese cuisine have changed, and what are they looking for now compared to, say, 10, 15 years ago?
It's so true. I mean, they back when I was cooking in the restaurant when I was a teenager, the food was very simple. It was very Cantonese based, and it was very simple stir fries and things that were Americanized, like egg foo young and ribs and egg rolls. And I have to say, a lot of that food these days has really gone by the wayside. Like now, if you search for a chicken chow mein, you get nothing on the internet like what we
Really?
cooked chow mein, 20, 30 years ago. It's a real chow mein with noodles. Back then, it was vegetables, onions, celery, water chestnuts, and mushrooms, and then you put some fried noodles on top. And so we actually have a recipe on the blog called American Chicken Chow Mein,
Right.
and that's what we cooked, or because we have a spectrum of people on the blog, and the older folks are like, "Hey, don't you have a recipe for chicken chow mein?" So we finally published one like that, and the evolution of Chinese food that has happened in the U.S. is really just amazing. And it's amazing to see, but it's even more amazing to be part of because now we're publishing recipes that span both on the early Chinese American dishes and also now the big wave of mainland China cuisine from different provinces that have made it over here is just amazing.
And Judy, I love how you play the role of the person who is bringing people back to tradition, to different flavors and regional flavors. Tell us more about your passion for that.
Well, as Bill was telling you about his view on this evolution, and I feel strongly about showing the readers or I guess the international audience there's a lot more to Chinese cuisines than they know of. Okay. Right now, what made it to the overseas, the type of Chinese food that has made it overseas, it's really a very, very small percentage of Chinese cuisine. There's so much more. I can't even begin because my knowledge is not enough. I don't know enough to, let's say, I want to share with everybody, because when I share a dish, I feel like, okay, first of all, we like it, and I feel like, oh, by knowing our readers, it's like, oh, you know what, I think the readers will like it. But you know what? There's so much more than we already shared. That's why when people say to us, it's like, oh, are you going to run out of recipes? I was like, wow, no way. Don't even worry about it. There's so much more.
One of my final questions for you is what kind of a legacy do you think that Walks of Life will lead, and what importance do you think that your platform has for Chinese Americans and maybe Asians and Chinese around the world?
That's a juicy question. So we're all jumping to answer. I think that for me, the legacy is kind of reflected in us. It's like that sort of passing down of this information through the generations. Like we've had so many readers come up to us and say, you've helped me reconnect with my heritage, or you've brought back dishes that we thought were lost because a family member had passed away or something like that. So I think that it's really about keeping these dishes alive, keeping them going, not just the sort of mainland. It's like the Americanized Chinese takeout food, the Chinese restaurant food from the different provinces of China, different regional cuisines. It's just the techniques, the ingredients, just making them all more accessible to the home cook, which I think is keeping these recipes alive, keeping the traditions alive as well. Because we try to also on the blog talk about the context in which this food sits, right? Like in some cases with Chinese holidays, for example, like in our whole poached chicken recipe, we talk about the symbolism of the dish, why it shows up at so many different holidays and rituals and festivals. So we try to place the food in the context and try to I guess for future generations that may not feel as connected to the past, like to perpetuate those traditions and keep them going.
Yeah. It's really just bringing Chinese cooking and Chinese techniques and ingredients into the domain of like mainstream home cooking. And I think that there are certain cuisines that have done that, like Italian food, right? Like at least in America, Italian food, like anybody making, pasta on a weeknight is so common. And I think that that's what's really exciting for me, at least, is, people making dan dan noodles on a weeknight or like, rolling out of bed on a Sunday and being like, hey, I want to make some dumplings. Like just that fluency on a broader scale, I think is what, I would hope that we sort of have had a part in doing over the last 10 years.
It's also a different kind of spectrum of home cooks and readers, right? I was just answering some comments the other night, and people were saying, "Oh, thank you so much, for your egg foo young recipe. Now I can cook egg foo young just the way I used to have it at my favorite restaurant." Now that was that I think from the judging from the name that they used in the comment, that was an American, an American person, and then there's the American-born Chinese that says, oh, that steamed chicken with lily flour and that was so good. I used to have that as a kid and I forgot how my mother used to make. So they're able to make that. And then there are people who go and have a twice cooked pork and they say, well, I kind of want to make that at home, or like the dan dan noodles. So there's a big wide spectrum of people, and I feel like the legacy is that we're going to leave behind this a set of recipes and the culture that goes with it, like Sarah said. And you come to the walks of life, whether it be the book or our website, to get this to sort of get this information that may have been lost if we hadn't have done that.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today, and let's definitely stay in touch. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, Sarah.